The Tethys shuddered as it broke through the crimson atmosphere of Kepler 442c, its hull screaming against alien winds that tasted of copper and sulfur. Dr. Felix Rowe pressed his face against the small porthole of the prisoner transport bay, watching streaks of lightning illuminate the toxic storm clouds below. The restraints cut into his wrists, but he barely noticed. After 3 years in the Interplanetary Penal Legion, pain had become background noise. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to Marcus Chun, a data terrorist whose crime had been exposing the locations of 12 terraforming colonies to raiders. He sat in the restraint chair beside Felix, his scarred face bearing the same expression of morbid fascination that many lifers developed. Our new home. Felix didn't respond. Home was a word that had lost meaning somewhere between his trial for unauthorized genetic experimentation and the first 100 days aboard the prison ship. Now home was wherever the Legion decided to dump their human refuse. The ship bucked violently, throwing the prisoners against their restraints. Emergency lights bathed the transport bay in hellish red as the automated voice began its final announcement. Attention prisoners. Atmospheric entry to Kepler 442c will commence in 30 minutes. Upon landing, you'll be issued basic survival equipment and tasked with establishing preliminary terraforming infrastructure. The expected survival rate for this assignment is 18%. May you find redemption in service. 18%. Felix had heard worse odds, but not by much. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the equations that had once consumed his life. The elegant mathematics of genetic transcription, the beautiful complexity of protein folding. Before the experiment, before the mutations, before the screaming. The transport bay held 200 prisoners, the dregs of human space. Murderers, terrorists, traitors, and those whose crimes were too complex for simple categorization. Felix belonged to the latter group. The military tribunal had been very specific. Crimes against genetic integrity, unauthorized human enhancement, and his personal favorite, creating an abomination unto the species. They weren't entirely wrong. A new voice cut through the din. Commander Sarah Voss, the ship's warden. Her words carried the crisp authority of someone who had never seen the inside of a cell. This world is classified as Class 5 hostile. The atmosphere is toxic to human life. The weather patterns are extreme. The indigenous life forms are unknown. You will establish mining operations to extract the rare earth elements needed for terraforming equipment. Those who distinguish themselves may earn early parole. More lies. Felix had run the numbers during his first year aboard the Tethys. No prisoner sent to a Class 5 world had ever been granted parole. The Legion's real purpose wasn't rehabilitation. It was disposal with extra steps. The ship lurched again, harder this time. Through the porthole, Felix could see they were descending through a canyon of crimson rock formations that jutted from the planet's surface like broken bones. The storm was getting worse, and the lightning was taking on an odd quality. Not the bright white of electrical discharge, but something deeper, more purple, almost organic in its movement. Something's wrong, Chen muttered, his fingers drumming against his restraints. We're coming in too fast. Felix had to agree. The descent angle was all wrong, and the ship's stabilizers were struggling against atmospheric conditions that seemed to defy standard physics. He watched the landscape rush past below, vast stretches of what looked like crystalline formations, their surfaces reflecting the lightning in impossible patterns. Then the ship screamed. It wasn't the normal groan of stressed metal or the whistle of atmospheric friction. This was something else entirely, a sound that seemed to come from the ship's bones, as if the Tethys itself was in pain. The emergency lights flickered, and for a moment Felix could have sworn he saw something moving in the shadows between the prisoner restraints. Hull breach in Section 7. Came the announcement, followed immediately by hull breach in Sections 4, 9, and 12. All personnel to emergency stations. The next 30 seconds were chaos. The ship hit something, not ground, but something that gave way with a sound like breaking glass. The prisoner bay tilted sideways, restraints snapping as 200 human bodies were flung against the bulkhead. Felix felt his shoulder pop as he slammed into Chun, who was already unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. Emergency foam began filling the compartment, the thick yellow substance designed to cushion prisoners during crashes. Felix held his breath and fought his way toward what he hoped was an emergency exit, feeling bodies floating around him in the artificial amber. His lungs burned, but he kept moving, following the faint glow of an exit sign. When the foam finally hardened enough for him to break through, Felix found himself in a corridor filled with toxic red mist. His first breath sent him into a coughing fit that tasted of metal and something else, something organic and wrong. Through the haze, he could see other figures moving, prisoners and guards alike stumbling through the wreckage. The ship had split open like a seed pod. Through the gap in the hull, Felix could see the alien landscape. Not the barren rock he had expected, but something far stranger. Crystalline trees stretched toward a sky the color of dried blood, their branches humming with an energy that made his teeth ache. In the distance, structures that were clearly artificial rose from a crimson ground, their surfaces covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Dr. Rowe. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Torres, one of the younger guards. She was bleeding from a cut above her eye, but otherwise seemed intact. Are you injured? Felix took inventory. Dislocated shoulder, cuts and bruises, but nothing that would kill him immediately. I'll live. What's our situation? Bad. Torres gestured toward the other survivors gathering near what remained of the ship's command section. We've got maybe 40 survivors out of 300. The ship's completely dead. No power, no communications, no environmental systems. And the air. She held up a scanner that was flashing angry red numbers. It's toxic as hell. Whatever's in this atmosphere is playing havoc with our equipment. Felix looked around at the other survivors. He recognized some faces from the prisoner bay. Chun was among them, conscious now, but moving slowly. There were also several guards and technical staff, including Commander Voss herself. She was barking orders to anyone who would listen, trying to establish some kind of perimeter around the crash site. First priority is shelter, Voss was saying. The storm's getting worse, and we need to get out of this atmosphere. Engineering. What do we have for environmental suits? 23 suits in working condition, reported Chief Engineer Walsh, a thick-set man whose arms were covered in radiation scars. Maybe 30 if we can jerry-rig some of the damaged ones. But the filters won't last long in this soup. Felix studied the alien landscape, while Voss organized the immediate survival efforts. The structures in the distance were clearly artificial, but they followed no architectural principles he recognized. They seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it, their surfaces shifting and flowing like living tissue. And there was something about the patterns covering them, geometric forms that seemed to suggest meaning, as if they were trying to communicate something. Dr. Rowe. Commander Voss approached, her expression grim. I'm temporarily suspending your prisoner status. We need every trained scientist we can get if we're going to survive this. Felix raised an eyebrow. Generous of you. What exactly do you want me to do? Your file says you're a geneticist. I need you to figure out what's in this atmosphere and how long we can survive breathing it. The scanners are giving us conflicting readings. Felix accepted the portable scanner she handed him and immediately understood the problem. The atmospheric composition readings were shifting constantly, as if the very air around them was alive and changing. Nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, all in roughly terrestrial proportions, but with trace elements that shouldn't exist. Complex organic compounds that seemed to be self-modifying, and something else that the scanner couldn't even identify. This is fascinating, he murmured, studying the data streams. The atmosphere isn't just toxic, it's adaptive. It's reacting to our presence. Is it trying to kill us? Felix considered the question seriously. I don't think so. If anything, it seems to be adjusting, learning. The oxygen levels have actually increased slightly since we landed. And these organic compounds. He frowned at the display. They're not random. There's a pattern here, almost like genetic code. A new voice interrupted them. Hey, Doc, you might want to see this. Felix turned to find Marcus Chin approaching, but something was wrong with the data terrorist's appearance. His movements were too smooth, too fluid, and his eyes seemed to be reflecting the red light of the alien sky in a way that human eyes shouldn't. Most disturbing was his expression. He looked happy. More than happy. He looked transformed. Chun. Felix stepped closer, scanner in hand. How are you feeling? Never better, Chun replied, and his voice carried harmonics that definitely hadn't been there before. In fact, I feel like I could fly. To demonstrate, he jumped. Not a normal jump, but a leap that carried him 15 feet into the air before he landed gracefully on his feet. Several of the other survivors backed away, weapons drawn, but Chun just laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Don't be afraid," he said. "This place, it's not trying to hurt us. It's trying to help us become something better." Felix aimed the scanner at Chun and nearly dropped it when he saw the readings. The man's cellular structure was changing, his DNA rewriting itself in real time. But it wasn't random mutation, it was directed, purposeful, as if something was guiding the process. "Commander," Felix said quietly, "we have a much bigger problem than toxic air." The emergency council convened in the wreckage of the ship's conference room, a space now open to the alien sky through a jagged hole in the hull. Felix had spent the last 6 hours running tests on Chun and 3 other survivors who were showing signs of change. The word mutation felt inadequate for what he was observing. "The atmospheric agents are definitely biological in origin," he reported to the assembled group. "They're entering our bodies through respiration and beginning a systematic rewrite of our genetic code. But here's the interesting part. They're not random mutations. The changes are following a specific pattern, as if our DNA is being edited according to some kind of template." Commander Voss leaned forward, her face grim. "How long do we have before we all end up like Chun?" Felix glanced at his notes. Chun and the others affected had become increasingly different as the hours passed. They moved with an alien grace. Their reflexes were impossibly quick, and they seemed to be developing abilities that defied explanation. Most unsettling was their psychological state. They claimed to feel better than they ever had, to understand things they had never understood before. "Based on the current rate of exposure and integration, I'd estimate we have between 18 and 36 hours before the process becomes irreversible for all of us," Felix said. "But Commander, I need to stress something important. This isn't a disease or a poison. It's more like an upgrade." "An upgrade to what?" Lieutenant Torres asked. She was one of the few guards who had survived the crash, and her hand never strayed far from her sidearm. Before Felix could answer, Marcus Chin's voice drifted from outside the makeshift shelter. He was speaking, but not in any language Felix recognized. The sounds were melodic, almost musical, and they seemed to be answered by something in the distance, a low humming that came from the direction of the alien structures. "He's been doing that for the last hour," reported Sergeant Mills, another survivor. "It's like he's talking to something out there." Felix moved to the edge of their shelter and looked out at the crimson landscape. The alien structures were definitely responding to Chin's vocalizations. Patterns of light were flowing across their surfaces, pulsing in rhythm with his strange songs. And Chin himself. Felix had to suppress a shiver. The man was floating 6 inches off the ground, his arms spread wide as he communed with whatever intelligence inhabited this world. "We need to make a decision," Voss said. "Do we try to find a way to reverse this process, or do we accept that we're going to change and try to control how it happens?" "There's a third option," said Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the ship's chief medical officer. She was one of the older survivors, her gray hair now streaked with what looked like silver threads that hadn't been there before the crash. "We study it, we learn from it, and we figure out what this place is really trying to tell us." Felix found himself nodding. "Dr. Kane is right. This isn't random. The structure's out there, the way the atmosphere is responding to us, Chin's new abilities, it's all connected. We're not just being changed, we're being prepared for something." "Prepared for what?" Torres demanded. The answer came from an unexpected source. Chin's voice, no longer melodic, but carrying clearly across the distance. "To inherit the galaxy." The group fell silent. Through the gap in the hull, they could see Chin approaching, but he was no longer walking. He moved through the air as if gravity were optional, his feet occasionally touching the ground but only as an afterthought. His skin had taken on a faint luminescence, and his eyes now reflected light like a cat's. "You need to listen to me," Chun said as he settled to the ground near their shelter. "I know how this looks, how I look, but I'm still me. More than me. Actually, the change isn't taking anything away. It's adding to what we already are." "You're terrifying," Torres said bluntly, her weapon trained on him. Chun smiled, and Felix noted that his teeth had developed a subtle bioluminescence. I understand your fear. But, Lieutenant, I can hear your heartbeat from here. I can smell the adrenaline in your sweat. I can see the micro-expressions on your face that reveal your thoughts before you think them. And most importantly, I can feel the genetic template that's already beginning to rewrite your DNA. You're going to become like me, whether you fight it or not. Felix stepped forward. Chen, what did you mean about inheriting the galaxy? The structures out there, they're not buildings. They're a message, a test. This whole planet is a laboratory, designed by a species that transcended physical existence long ago. They left these worlds scattered throughout the galaxy, waiting for younger species to find them. The process we're going through, it's their gift to us. Dr. Kane moved closer, her scanner active. Gift or trap? Neither. Evolution. Chen gestured toward the alien structures. They face the same choice we're facing now: remain bound by the limitations of biological existence, or accept transformation into something greater. They chose transformation, and they left these worlds as stepping stones for others to follow the same path. Commander Voss stepped forward, her expression hard. And if we refuse? Chen's smile faded. The process is already too far along to stop. But you can fight it, make it incomplete, turn yourself into something between human and what you could become. The previous visitors who made that choice, some of them are still here. Still alive, after a fashion. They're not entirely sane anymore. As if summoned by his words, a sound echoed across the landscape. A howl that contained notes of human agony, mixed with something completely alien. It came from the direction of a cluster of twisted spires about a mile from their crash site. How many other ships have crashed here? Felix asked. 7 that I can sense, Chen replied. Scattered across the continent over the last 50 years. Most of the crews chose to fight the change. Some killed themselves rather than transform. A few, well, you heard them. Torres tightened her grip on her weapon. So our choices are become monsters, die, or go insane. No, Chen said patiently. Your choice is to evolve or remain trapped in a form that was never meant to survive on a world like this. Dr. Rowe, you're a scientist. You understand evolution. This is simply the next step. Felix studied the data on his scanner. Chen was right about one thing. The atmospheric agents were already in all of their systems, beginning the slow process of genetic modification. But there were variables Chen wasn't mentioning. The process could be influenced, directed, possibly even controlled if they understood the mechanism better. I need to examine those structures, Felix said. If this is really a test, or a laboratory, there should be information there. Instructions, maybe even safeguards. I was hoping you'd say that, Chen replied. Because there's something else. The changes aren't just physical. As the process continues, we'll develop new senses, new ways of thinking. But we'll also become connected. To each other, to the planet, to the network that spans the galaxy. The isolation that defines human existence will end. You mean we'll lose our individuality? Voss said. You'll expand it. Your consciousness will remain yours. But you'll be able to share it, to merge it temporarily with others. Imagine being able to directly access another person's knowledge, their skills, their memories. Imagine a civilization where deception is impossible because minds can touch minds. Felix found the concept both terrifying and alluring. What about the ones who've gone insane? What happened to them? Chen's expression darkened. They tried to hold on to their humanity while accepting the physical changes. The contradiction broke their minds. That's why we need to understand what we're becoming before the process goes too far. Half measures will destroy us. Another howl echoed across the landscape, closer this time. Through the gap in the hull, Felix could see movement among the distant spires, figures that moved wrong, as if their bodies no longer obeyed the laws of anatomy. How long before we start changing like you? Dr. Kane asked. For most of you, the first visible changes will begin within the next 12 hours, Chen replied. But the process can be accelerated or directed if you understand how to work with it. The structures contain the knowledge, but you have to be willing to accept the truth they offer. Felix made his decision. I'm going to the structures. Dr. Kane, I'll need your help with the biological analysis. Commander Voss, I recommend you assign a security detail, but they need to understand that we're not going there to fight. We're going there to learn. Voss nodded grimly. Torres, Mills, you're with them. But if this is a trap, then we spring it knowingly, Felix said, because the alternative is springing it blind. As the group began to organize for the expedition to the alien structures, Felix couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. But looking at the readings on his scanner, seeing the inexorable progress of the genetic changes already occurring in their bodies, he realized that threshold had been crossed the moment the Tethys broke through the crimson atmosphere. The only question now was whether they would cross it as conscious participants in their own evolution, or as victims of forces they refused to understand. The journey to the alien structures took 3 hours across terrain that defied geological classification. What had appeared to be crimson rock from a distance revealed itself to be some kind of organic crystal that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. The surface yielded slightly under their feet, as if they were walking on living tissue, and Felix's scanners detected a vast network of biological activity beneath the ground. It's like the entire planet is one massive organism, Dr. Kane observed, kneeling to examine a formation that looked like a tree but felt warm to the touch and hummed with electromagnetic activity. These aren't separate life forms. They're organs in a planetary consciousness. Felix nodded, his attention divided between Kane's observations and the increasingly strange behavior of their group. Chen moved ahead of them with an easy confidence, no longer constrained by gravity or the need to touch the ground regularly. More concerning were the changes in Torres and Mills. Both guards were showing the early signs of transformation: enhanced reflexes, improved vision, and a subtle shift in the way they carried themselves. But it was the psychological changes that worried Felix most. Torres had started finishing Mills' sentences, and both of them occasionally stopped to listen to sounds that no one else could hear. When Felix asked about it, Torres had simply said, "The planet is singing." The structures loomed ahead of them, impossible geometries that seemed to fold space around themselves. As they drew closer, Felix could see that the surfaces weren't solid, but composed of countless smaller elements that moved and shifted like living cells. Patterns of light flowed across the alien architecture in waves, creating designs that were hypnotically beautiful and completely incomprehensible. How are we supposed to interface with this? Mills asked, his voice carrying new harmonics that hadn't been there that morning. It doesn't look like it was designed for human hands. Chun smiled, an expression that was becoming increasingly unsettling as his facial structure subtly altered. It wasn't designed for human hands. It was designed for minds that have been expanded. He approached the nearest structure and placed his palm against its surface. The response was immediate. The entire edifice lit up with cascading patterns of light, and a section of the wall dilated open like an iris. Beyond was a corridor that glowed with soft bioluminescence, its walls covered in symbols that seemed to shift and dance when observed directly. "After you, Dr. Rowe," Chen said with a gesture. "Your scientific mind is exactly what this place has been waiting for." Felix hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct screamed that entering the structure was a mistake, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. The scanner in his hand was detecting energy signatures unlike anything in human science, and the patterns on the walls suggested a form of communication that transcended simple language. The interior was vast, far larger than the external dimensions should have allowed. Corridors branched off in directions that didn't correspond to three-dimensional space, and the ceiling disappeared into a soft glow that might have been artificial sky or something else entirely. The walls were covered in what Felix initially took for writing, but as he studied the symbols more closely, he realized they were something far more complex. "These aren't symbols," he murmured, running his scanner over a section of wall. "They're genetic sequences. Millions of them, representing species from across the galaxy." Dr. Kane joined him, her own equipment detecting biochemical patterns in the alien script. Not just genetic sequences, they're enhancement protocols. Instructions for directed evolution. "Felix, this is a catalog of every species that's ever undergone this transformation, including us," Chen added, pointing to a section of wall where new patterns were actively forming. "Our genetic information is being recorded even as we change." Felix studied the emerging patterns and felt a chill of recognition. The genetic markers were unmistakably human, but they were being modified, optimized, prepared for integration with something larger. This isn't just transformation, he said. It's recruitment. This entire process is designed to create new members of something. A galactic consciousness, Chun confirmed. A network of evolved species that spans the known universe. Every world like this is a node in that network, and every species that undergoes the transformation becomes part of the collective knowledge of the galaxy. Torres, who had been unusually quiet during the exploration, suddenly spoke up. But what happened to the original species? The ones who built this place? The answer came not from Chun, but from the structure itself. The walls around them suddenly shifted, the genetic patterns rearranging themselves into something resembling a narrative. Images formed in the bioluminescent display. A species that looked vaguely humanoid, but with elongated limbs and features that suggested they had already undergone significant evolutionary modification. They transcended physical existence entirely, Chen explained, his voice taking on the same musical quality that Felix had noticed in his communications with the planet. Once a species reaches a certain level of development, individual bodies become optional. They exist as pure consciousness, able to inhabit any form necessary for their purposes. Felix felt a mixture of wonder and terror. And that's what we're supposed to become, eventually. But that's far in the future. For now, the process is simply preparing us for integration with the galactic network. We'll retain our physical forms, but enhanced beyond current human limitations. Stronger, faster, more intelligent, and capable of direct mind-to-mind communication. Dr. Kane was studying another section of the wall display. Felix, look at this. There are records here of species that rejected the transformation. They're all gone. Extinct. The network tried to preserve them, but without the ability to adapt, they couldn't survive the challenges that face a galactic civilization. The implications were staggering. Felix moved deeper into the structure, following corridors that led to chambers filled with incomprehensible technologies. In one room, he found what appeared to be biological computers, living organisms that process information at rates that would make quantum computers look like simple calculators. In another, he discovered environmental controls that could reshape the very atmosphere of a planet in real time. But it was the final chamber that truly shook his understanding of what they were dealing with. The room was enormous, its walls covered with a display that showed the entire galaxy in real time. Countless worlds were highlighted in different colors, representing different stages of the transformation process. Red worlds were uninhabited or contained primitive species. Yellow worlds had species undergoing the enhancement process. Green worlds contained fully integrated members of the galactic network. And scattered throughout the galaxy were purple worlds, dead worlds where species had rejected the transformation and subsequently gone extinct. How many? Felix asked, staring at the display. 47 species have rejected the network over the last 1,000,000 years, Chen replied, his voice now carrying an echo that suggested he was accessing information from sources beyond his individual mind. All are extinct, not because the network destroyed them, but because they couldn't adapt to the realities of galactic existence. Wars, natural disasters, genetic bottlenecks, species that remain locked in their original biological forms lack the flexibility to survive long-term. Felix studied the Earth's location on the display. It showed yellow, indicating that the transformation process was underway. But there were other yellow markers in the solar system: Mars, Europa, Titan. The network was seeding multiple worlds simultaneously. This is bigger than just us, he realized. The entire human species is being evaluated for integration. Not just humans, Dr. Kane said from across the room. She was standing before another display that showed detailed biological information. Every sentient species in our local galactic region. This is a systematic process of evolution that's been ongoing for millions of years. A new sound echoed through the chamber. A harmonious note that seemed to come from the structure itself. Felix felt a strange sensation, as if something was trying to connect with his mind directly. For a moment, he could sense the thoughts of his companions not as separate entities, but as facets of a larger consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. He could feel Chen's absolute certainty about the rightness of the transformation, Dr. Kane's scientific fascination warring with her fear of losing her humanity, and Torres's struggle to maintain her sense of duty while accepting abilities that made her previous understanding of reality obsolete. And underneath it all, he could sense something vast and patient and ancient, the consciousness of the network itself, observing their reactions and adjusting its approach accordingly. "It's trying to communicate directly," Felix gasped, pulling back from the mental contact. "The network. It's conscious. It's been watching us since we arrived." Chen nodded, his form now noticeably more luminescent than it had been hours earlier. "It's been watching humanity for centuries, waiting for us to develop space travel and begin exploring other worlds. This planet isn't just a transformation laboratory, it's a test site. The network needs to understand how each species will integrate before offering full membership." "And if we fail the test?" Torres asked. The answer came not from Chun, but from a new voice, one that spoke directly into their minds without using sound at all. "Then you join the others who chose isolation over evolution. The galaxy is not kind to species that refuse to grow." Felix spun around, trying to locate the source of the mental voice, but there was no one else in the chamber. The communication had come from the network itself, transmitted through the biological systems of the alien structure. "You have seen the records of those who came before. You understand the choice that faces your species. Accept the transformation and join the galactic community, or remain bound by the limitations that will ultimately destroy you. Show us," Felix said aloud. "Show us what integration really means." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The chamber around them dissolved, replaced by a vision that encompassed not just their immediate perceptions, but their entire understanding of reality. Felix found himself experiencing existence from the perspective of the galactic network, a consciousness that spanned millions of worlds and billions of enhanced beings. He could sense the thoughts and experiences of species so advanced that their original forms were barely recognizable. Beings of pure energy that could exist in the vacuum of space, creatures that had modified themselves to thrive in the cores of stars, and entities that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions. But most importantly, he could sense their purpose. The network wasn't just a collection of advanced species. It was engaged in a project of almost incomprehensible scope. They were reshaping the galaxy itself, preparing for something that waited in the deep void between galaxies. When the vision ended, Felix found himself back in the chamber, but fundamentally changed. Not physically, that process was still ongoing, but in his understanding of what humanity was being offered. "We're not being recruited," he said quietly. "We're being prepared. There's something out there, something that threatens the entire galaxy. The network is gathering and enhancing every viable species because they need all the help they can get." Chen nodded, his transformation now so advanced that his features were becoming difficult to recognize as human. The deep void harbors intelligences that view biological existence as an aberration to be corrected. They've already consumed several smaller galaxies. Our galaxy is next, unless the network can develop enough collective power to resist them. Felix looked around at his companions, all of whom were now showing visible signs of change. Dr. Kane's hair had turned completely silver and seemed to move with a life of its own. Torres and Mills were developing the same luminescent quality as Chun, and their movements had taken on an inhuman grace. And Felix himself, he could feel the changes beginning in his own body, his cellular structure reorganizing according to templates billions of years in the making. "We need to get back to the others," he said. "They need to understand what we're really facing." But as they prepared to leave the alien structure, Felix couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge wouldn't be convincing the survivors to accept the transformation. It would be convincing them to accept what they would become afterward, soldiers in a war for the survival of biological consciousness itself. The return journey to the crash site revealed the true extent of how rapidly their situation was deteriorating. The storm that had been brewing when they left had intensified into something that defied meteorological explanation. Lightning now moved through the crimson sky in geometric patterns, and the very air seemed to pulse with energy that made Felix's enhanced senses ring like bells. More concerning were the sounds echoing across the landscape, the howls and screams of the previous crash survivors who had fought the transformation. They were getting closer, and their voices carried a hunger that suggested they had moved beyond madness into something actively predatory. "They're drawn to the process," Chun explained as they hurried across the organic crystal terrain. His transformation had accelerated during their time in the structure, and he now moved with a fluid grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The incomplete transformation creates an endless craving for genetic material. They attack others undergoing the change, trying to steal what they couldn't accept in themselves. Felix checked his scanner and saw that all of them were now showing advanced genetic modification. Dr. Kane's cellular structure had shifted so dramatically that she barely registered as human anymore, though her consciousness remained intact. Torres and Mills moved as a synchronized unit, their individual identities beginning to merge into something collective. And Felix himself, he could feel new neural pathways forming in his brain, connections that allowed him to perceive dimensions of reality that had been invisible before. The scanner in his hand was no longer necessary. He could sense the biological signatures of every living thing within a mile radius. When they reached the crash site, they found chaos. The 40 survivors had split into 3 distinct groups, each occupying a different section of the ship's wreckage. Commander Voss had established a fortified position around the main hull breach, her followers armed and clearly preparing for a siege. About a dozen survivors had gathered near the engine section under the leadership of Chief Engineer Walsh, and they appeared to be working on some kind of technological project. The third group was the most disturbing. They had moved away from the ship entirely, establishing a camp on the organic crystal formations about 100 yards away. Even from a distance, Felix could see that their transformation was proceeding rapidly, but without guidance or understanding. They moved erratically, their enhanced abilities manifesting in dangerous and unpredictable ways. 3 factions, Dr. Kane observed, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated directly with Felix's enhanced hearing. The resistors, the adapters, and the lost. Shin nodded, his luminescent form clearly visible to all 3 groups. This is what happened to most of the previous crashes. Internal conflict during the transformation process. It rarely ends well. As they approached the main group, Commander Voss emerged from behind a makeshift barricade constructed from ship debris. Her weapon was drawn, and Felix could see the fear in her eyes as she took in their transformed appearances. "Stay back," she warned. "I don't know what you've become, but you're not my people anymore." Felix raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, noting that his skin had developed the same subtle luminescence as the others. "Commander, we're still human. Enhanced, but human. And we've learned something critical about what's happening here." "You look like monsters," Voss replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Felix could sense, with abilities he was still learning to use, that she was fighting the same changes they had already accepted. Her genetic structure was shifting, her neural pathways expanding, but she was resisting every step of the process. "We found the alien archives," Felix continued. "This transformation isn't random, and it isn't meant to destroy us. This entire world is a testing ground for integration into a galactic network of evolved species. But there's something else, a threat from outside our galaxy that requires all sentient species to unite and enhance themselves for survival." Dr. Kane stepped forward, her movements now so graceful they seemed choreographed. "Sarah, look at your hands." Voss glanced down and involuntarily stepped back. Her hands were beginning to develop the same silver threading that had appeared in Kane's hair, and her fingertips were starting to glow with bioluminescence. "It's happening to all of us," Kane continued gently. "The atmospheric agents are too pervasive to resist, but we can guide the process, make it beneficial instead of destructive. The choice isn't whether to change, it's whether to change consciously or fight it until it breaks our minds." From behind the barricade, another voice called out, "Dr. Rowe, thank God you're back." Felix recognized Technician Phillips, a young woman who had been part of the ship's science staff. She emerged from the fortified position, and Felix was shocked to see how much she had changed in just the few hours they had been gone. Her transformation was proceeding along different lines than the others. Instead of the luminescent enhancement that characterized most of the changes, her modifications appear to be focused on mental acuity. Her eyes had become larger and more complex, and Felix could sense the rapid expansion of her cognitive abilities. "Phillips," he said carefully, "how are you feeling?" "Like I can see everything," she replied, her voice carrying an odd echo. The mathematical relationships underlying reality, the quantum fluctuations in space-time, the genetic patterns flowing through every living thing on this planet. It's beautiful and terrifying, and I can't make it stop. Felix exchanged glances with Dr. Kane. Phillips was experiencing cognitive enhancement without the emotional and psychological preparation that the others had received through their connection to the planetary network. She was becoming something beyond human intelligence, but without the wisdom to handle the transformation. "Phillips, I need you to listen to me," Felix said. "The changes you're experiencing, they're meant to be gradual, guided. You're trying to process too much too quickly." "I can see the equations," she continued, her enlarged eyes now reflecting light in complex patterns. "The mathematical proof that consciousness is the fundamental force of the universe. Matter and energy are just side effects. And there are things coming from the void between galaxies, things that want to prove consciousness is an error in the cosmic equation." Her words sent a chill through Felix. Even in her uncontrolled state, Phillips was accessing the same information they had learned in the alien archive. The network's warnings about threats from the void were confirmed by her enhanced perception. Before Felix could respond, a new commotion erupted from the direction of the engine section. Chief Engineer Walsh and his group were shouting warnings, and Felix could see them pointing toward the horizon where dark shapes were moving against the crimson sky. "Incoming," Mills called out, his enhanced senses having detected the approaching threat before anyone else. Multiple contacts, moving fast. Felix turned his enhanced perception toward the approaching figures and immediately understood the danger. These were the survivors from the previous crashes, the ones who had fought the transformation and lost their sanity in the process. There were dozens of them, their bodies showing the results of incomplete genetic modification. They moved wrong, as if their enhanced physical abilities were controlled by minds that no longer understood human limitations. "Defensive positions," Voss commanded, her military training overriding her fear of the transformed survivors. "All armed personnel to the perimeter." But Felix realized that conventional weapons would be useless against creatures that had been enhanced beyond human limitations, but retained none of human restraint. These weren't enemies that could be fought. They were tragedies that had to be contained. "Wait," he called out. "Fighting them will only make it worse. They're drawn to conflict, to the bioelectric signatures of fear and aggression. If we can project calm, acceptance." Chen was already moving, his form beginning to glow more brightly as he approached the edge of their defensive perimeter. "Felix is right. These creatures are what we become if we fight the process instead of accepting it. But they're still, at some level, people. They can be reached." The approaching figures were close enough now for Felix to see the extent of their transformation. They had been human once, but their bodies had become grotesque parodies of enhancement. Limbs stretched to impossible lengths, faces distorted by bone growth that followed no biological logic, and movements that suggested their nervous systems no longer functioned according to natural principles. But as Chun began to sing, the same melodic communication he had used with the planetary network, the creatures slowed their approach. The harmonious notes seemed to calm something in their fractured minds, and their aggressive postures shifted to confused curiosity. "It's working," Torres whispered, her own voice now harmonizing with Chen's song without conscious effort. Felix joined the chorus, letting his enhanced vocal cords produce sounds that resonated with frequencies beyond normal human hearing. Dr. Kane and Mills added their voices, and gradually the entire group of transformed survivors was singing a song that had no words, but conveyed concepts of peace, acceptance, and unity. The mad creatures stopped their advance entirely, their distorted faces showing the first expressions of recognition Felix had seen. They were remembering what it felt like to be part of a community, to exist in harmony rather than endless hunger. But the momentary peace was shattered by the crack of projectile weapons. Someone from Voss's group had opened fire, the explosive rounds tearing through one of the creatures and splattering its luminescent blood across the crystal ground. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The remaining creatures erupted into a frenzy of rage and hunger, their enhanced abilities turning them into living weapons that moved faster than human reflexes could track. They scattered and began circling the crash site, their inhuman howls echoing across the landscape. "You idiots!" Chun shouted, his luminescent form flickering with anger. They were calming down. Commander Voss emerged from behind the barricade, her weapon still smoking. "Those things aren't human anymore. We don't negotiate with monsters." Felix felt a surge of rage that surprised him with its intensity. Through his enhanced senses, he could perceive the fear and pain driving the creature's madness, the desperate hunger created by their incomplete transformation. They weren't monsters. They were victims of the same choice Voss was making right now. "Sarah," he said, struggling to keep his voice calm, "you just condemned us all to exactly the same fate as those creatures. They became what they are because they fought the change instead of accepting it. You're making the same mistake." But Voss wasn't listening. She was staring at Phillips, who had begun to glow with an intense white light that hurt to look at directly. The young technician was no longer responding to external stimuli. Her enhanced consciousness apparently focused on realities beyond the immediate crisis. "The equations are becoming unstable," Phillips said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass hearing and speak directly to the brain. "The probability matrix is collapsing. Unless the variables are corrected within the next 7.3 hours, this reality branch terminates." Felix felt a chill of understanding. Phillips wasn't just experiencing enhanced cognition. She was seeing the mathematical foundations of causality itself. And according to her calculations, their current path led to extinction. "What variables?" he asked urgently. "What needs to be corrected?" Phillips turned her luminous gaze toward him, and for a moment Felix felt as if he was looking into the mathematical heart of the universe itself. "Unity," she said simply. "The transformation requires social coherence. Individual consciousness must voluntarily merge into collective consciousness. Resistance creates paradox. Paradox creates dissolution." Around them, the maddened creatures continued their circling hunt, while the three factions of survivors remained divided by fear and misunderstanding. And somewhere in the distance, Felix could sense other threats approaching, the cosmic intelligences from the void that the Galactic network had been created to resist. Time was running out, and humanity's first test was failing.